Hey everyone, welcome back to this week's episode of Ask a Catholic Therapist. We're going to dive into the question of how do you know if you need to change therapists? How do you know if it's time to find someone new? So I want to offer two possible suggestions or indicators for when you know maybe that your particular therapy with this particular therapist has run its course. The first is the therapeutic relationship. We call this in the business the Therapeutic Alliance. So the Therapeutic Alliance is comprised of the bond between the therapist and client and agreement on goals, like you both agree on what you want to work toward, and agreement on how you're going to get there. And those three things make up the Therapeutic Alliance. So the bond, the quality of the bond, agreement on tasks and goals. Why is this important? It's important because the Therapeutic Alliance is the best predictor that we have that's sort of within our control. It's the best predictor we have within our control of outcomes in therapy, of how likely you are to get better. The best predictor is the Therapeutic Alliance. And so if you want to find out sort of whether or not maybe therapy is going well, you can look to the Therapeutic Alliance. You should look to the bond. So you can ask yourself these questions. Do you feel safe and comfortable being vulnerable and open with your therapist? Like, do you feel like you can open your heart and really share difficult, painful experiences, memories, thoughts, ideas with your therapist? The next question you might ask is, do you feel like your therapist gets you? Right? Do you feel like they feel you? Do you feel like the bond is strong enough that they can enter into your experience enough so that you feel like their empathy? You also want to ask yourself the question whether or not in this therapeutic bond or this therapeutic relationship, whether or not you feel like you can be honest with the therapist about things that may not be going well or things you don't like. So, can you be interpersonally honest? Perhaps the therapist said something that frustrated you, that made you sad, that insulted you or hurt your feelings. Perhaps they missed something. Perhaps you were trying to share something and they misunderstood you. Do you feel comfortable sharing this with the therapist? That would be another indication that if the answer is yes, you have a strong therapeutic bond. And if not, maybe there's an issue. I think it's important that we feel comfortable, we feel safe sharing even critical information about the therapist with the therapist. So look to the Therapeutic Alliance. I would also ask, do you actually feel like your experience with the therapist is collaborative? Like, do you feel like you've agreed upon what you're working toward and how you're going to get there? Or do you feel like it was sort of imposed on you? Do you feel like you're just sort of following along? Good therapy should be a collaborative process. It should be a process in which the therapist brings their expertise, their knowledge, their experience and insight. They bring their appreciation of the relevant literature and research, but they're using that in conjunction with you as the client, as the patient, and what you're interested in working on, what you're interested in focusing on, what feels important to you. A good therapist can engage in a collaborative process, which makes you feel seen, heard, appreciated, and like you're a co-contributor to the healing process. So, look to the Therapeutic Alliance at large, the quality of your bond and agreement upon goals and tasks. Okay, so that's one indicator. The second would be, do you feel like you're making progress? So after you've evaluated the quality of your bond, and maybe you have a very good bond with your therapist, maybe you agree and it's collaborative, the question is, do you feel like you're making progress? Like, do you feel like you're moving toward those goals you've agreed upon? I think good therapy, good counseling, should give you some markers or indicators that you're moving toward your goal. You should have some clear sense that I'm actually progressing and getting better. And I think good counseling or good therapy is explicit about that. You and your therapist or counselor will talk about this openly and honestly, about signs of progress, indicators of progress, and areas where you might be slipping back and how you know you're slipping back or stagnating. So I think you have to ask yourself, am I getting better? Am I progressing toward my goals? Am I having a decrease in symptoms, or am I feeling more connected to others, or are my problems with my spouse decreasing? And being very concrete and specific in measuring or determining your progress. So evaluate the quality of the bond, and then ask yourself, am I getting better? Am I moving forward? Sometimes the work you can do with a particular therapist just sort of fizzles out. You're just not making as much progress as you used to, and that's okay. There's two options there. The first option is you can actually talk about that with your therapist. You can say, hey, look, I feel like I'm not moving forward in the way or at the pace that I'd like to. I wonder if we could talk about that and game plan how to move forward. That's one option. The other option is to maybe terminate with the therapist, right? If you don't feel comfortable saying that to your therapist, that's a good indication that there might be an issue. But if you do feel comfortable saying it to the therapist, it might be that this therapist can help you move forward, or it might be that this therapist feels like they've taken you as far as they can. And sometimes that's the case. Sometimes a particular therapist is really helpful for us for a particular problem or for a particular season in our life. And then it can be time to find a new therapist to continue on to make the kind of progress we want to make. But I think this should be a conversation that you should be able to have openly and honestly with a good therapist. So I hope this helps. If you're wondering if you should still be in therapy with this particular therapist, how do you know if you should be? Look to the bond. Do you feel seen, heard, understood? Is it collaborative? Would you say it's like an intimate, open and honest relationship, right? And look to your progress. Are you getting better in the ways and at the pace you'd like to get better? Now, the caveat there is we all want to get better yesterday. And so we have to be realistic about the speed with which we get better. Healing is a process, and it's a lifelong process. At the end of the day, we'll ultimately only ever be fully healed and completely healed in the beatific vision, right, as we look face to face upon our Lord. But we should be progressing, and we should notice that progression, and we should be able to appreciate that progression, even though oftentimes healing is like climbing a mountain, right? There's peaks and valleys even as you're progressing upward. But we should notice some change and some appreciable change. So look to those two things as at least initial indicators of whether or not therapy is working for you and whether you should begin to consider maybe switching therapists. Hope that helps.